Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets have won 9 out of their last 10 games. And with those first set of big tests looming on the schedule, we talk about some of the key changes that Jacque Vaughn has made to this team that may be contributing to their new winning ways.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends. There's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the soon-to-be playoff-bound New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy, Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, it's a bit of an off day. Couple of days off here before the Nets get back on the court on Wednesday night. We had highlighted the other day critical dates, nationally televised games that are going to tell us a lot about what this team is. And it started to get me thinking about, again, maybe one of the key figures in this process, Jacque Vaughn, and the way that his style is really starting to starkly contrast that of the previous head coach, Steve Nash.
Yeah, look, winning cures a lot of this stuff. They've won 10 of the last 11. They're up to the 4th seed in the East. They could
10
be
of 11,
even
sorry.
What's that?
I said 9 out of 10, 10 of 11. Sorry.
Yeah, whatever. Doesn't matter. So it's just been a nice little run here. 4th in the East, probably, with the chance to move up. We talked about how there are some tougher games ahead of us, although they're going to catch the Warriors now without Steph Curry. And that's become a theme of the season also, that they've been able to catch some of these teams without their best players. But you mentioned Vaughn, and we've talked about him on a previous podcast, maybe a week or two ago, and it bears repeating again that he just has been, it really has seemed like he's been a catalyst for such big changes, both from a stability standpoint and just maybe a confidence standpoint, or at least maybe a plan standpoint. And, by all accounts, from what we've heard, or what we just heard from him in general, just in pre-games and post-games and things like that, combined with some reporting, which we'll get to here in a second, there does seem to be something of a cultural shift around the Nets right now that is paying dividends, and that makes sense, right? And I think that it's kind of nice. Like it's kind of a place we really haven't been in.
And it's not bad.
I kind of like it. I think I could get used to this. And it's just not a place where we've been with this team for what seems like seasons and seasons now. And there's just increasing evidence that this version of Vaughn, who has been through the NBA coaching ranks for a long time, both head coach and assistant coach, and then head coach, and then back to assistant. And that can be a lot for a different guy, but that can also teach you a lot. And it seems like we're probably on the latter part here with Vaughn.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I think what's fascinating, which you'd never hear from Jacque Vaughn or any assistant coach that becomes the interim or permanent head coach after a firing, is if you're Jacque Vaughn, you probably throughout the last couple of years are maybe just notating not only the ways in which you maybe would do something different, but as an assistant, you're there to support the head coach in the process that he wants to go through. But also, what is Kevin Durant maybe not such a big fan of? What is Kyrie Irving not liking? You get Ben Simmons in the door. Even a guy like Nick Claxton, who gets mentioned, as we're going to use the Matt Brooks article from Nets Daily, who discusses this difference when it comes to practices and shoot-arounds for this team. You're probably just, in the back of your mind saying, oh, okay, if it were me hearing the feedback, I might try this. I might do that. Looking at some of the injuries, some of the health issues that this team has had over the last couple of years, knowing that Kevin Durant is a year older. We've talked so much about minutes, not overworking him, thinking about the big picture, the long term. You would think a guy worth his weight as a coach would kind of have some things in his hip pocket that he would immediately want to change. And then that seems to be the indication here when we look at the Matt Brooks article, which highlights I find it interesting for a very specific reason, going back to Kevin Durant's comments in the offseason and even the start of this year around practicing during the week and around pregame shoot-arounds, two things that Jacque Vaughn has greatly reduced and nearly completely taken off the table for this team. Each of those structures have not happened only once since December 2nd when it comes to shoot-arounds, and December 10th when it comes to practices throughout the week, which to me was a shocking bit of information when you just think about the way most teams are structured.
Yeah, when I opened up this article, this came out a couple days ago, Friday, December 16th, on Dents Daily by a friend of the show, Matt Brooks, that because the title of it is Inside Jacque Vaughn's Unique Approach to Nets Practice and Shoot-Arounds. Now, when I read that title, I probably reacted the same way, judging by what you just said, reacted the same way you did, which was I presumed what I was going to read in the article was that they were really practicing a ton. And they were really honing in on all these like minor details. And this was like the new Vaughn style that was antithetical to what we, had heard about maybe what was happening from Nash. To have it be not only not that, but the complete opposite of that. I had the same reaction. I was floored. I was like, wasn't this the whole Durant issue, which I'm assuming this kind of what you're alluding to, right? Is that Durant comments in the offseason that he wants to be coached harder and they want to be practicing all this stuff. So I walked in with that part on Bayesian examining my own priors of like figuring out where what this guy had said in the offseason. And to hear that Vaughn has gone maybe even, I don't want to call it a lax style because everyone kind of I have a theory about this, by the way, but like that not a lax style, but the way Nick Claxton said it in the piece was that he was like, everyone's here as a professional. Everyone knows what they need to do. Everyone knows the work they need to put in. And we appreciate that we have a coach that understands that we know that. I'm with you. I was shocked that this was the reality because I thought for sure after just reading the headline was, oh, we're going to hear about how they've really buckled down. Not that they're grinding it down to the not that they're putting it down to the grindstone here, but that they're working on all the little stuff in practice because that's what you kind of hear come out of Vaughn's mouth. So to have it go the other way, I was with you. I was floored. I do have a theory about this.
Yeah, and so I mean, let's discuss it a little bit because I think that on the one hand, you want to respond and react to what Kevin Durant, the clear leader of this team, what he's saying. Now, his comments though are also a product of results. So when you're going out and it seems like the offensive sets aren't working, there isn't a rhythm, there isn't a continuity, there isn't a clear understanding of whose roles are what, you start to look at it, even at Kevin Durant's level, and go, well, if it's not working in game, then we got to figure it out before we get on the court. The other way that it can work well for you is if it's working on the court like it's been for the Brooklyn Nets of late, well, then guess what? At this point, to your point about Claxton's comments, we're all professionals. We know what our roles are. As I think his closing line was, we get to just chill and be ready for the games. It's like, hey, one of the things that Vaughn has very clearly talked about with consistency is know your role, be ready when I call upon you, and let's go out there and execute. And his in-game strategies have looked a lot more crisp, right? The use of timeouts has been a lot more crisp. My thinking is he is doing this not on the fly in a negative way. He's doing it on the fly as in, game to game, as I see issues come up, I'm going to address them in real time. And if those adjustments get taken in by the players and it gets effectively implemented going forward, we need not worry about it. Let's keep the ball rolling here until we maybe come to a point where there's a real issue that requires significant adjustments that you just can't handle across 4 quarters.
Yeah, I think that I totally agree with that. And I think that I'm with you because it's become something of a chicken or the egg scenario here. It's like, what comes first? The winning comes first, so you appreciate the practice schedule kind of piece of it, or is it that like the winning is because of the practice schedule? Like it's sometimes hard to tell with scenarios like this. But I think it actually goes. I'm going to do a little.
I'll tell you right now, if the Nets had lost 10 out of their last 11. Nobody would be singing the praises of not practicing or having pregame shoot-arounds. Right?
It would never have been mentioned. It just never would have been mentioned. I think that would have been the other part of it. I do have a theory about that, sort of that dives into more of maybe into the personalities here as well, because I think that is something we also just really need to talk about. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. You browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. And this is what Turo's great. Like, just forget about that old rental car kind of philosophy. With Turo, you're going to get just the kind of car you need to test out for just the kind of occasion or maybe just life decision that you need. You can book a spacious SUV or a minivan if you're going on a family road trip. You get that classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Maybe you want to just get an affordable car to get you from point A to point B. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring car rentals and find your drive at Turo.com.
So we're going to dive into some more of the factors around this with Jacque Vaughn, and also a departed player who maybe provides even a little more context to the way this ship needed to be righted in Brooklyn. We want to, of course, thank you for making Locked On Nets your first listen every day. You can make that second listen. The Locked On Sports Today podcast is the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less. Plus, instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's take of the day. Locked On Sports Today is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast needs fulfilled. Before I touch on James Harden, I know it's like the Voldemort word we don't say on the podcast these days around Brooklyn Nets fans. What else did you want to supplement that with? Because by and large, it seems like the quotes were pretty positive. I think Ben Simmons, though, said it was interesting, which I find interesting because it's not like a ringing endorsement of it. And maybe there's a difference there for Ben Simmons, who's a guy trying to get acclimated, not only for himself getting back on the court, but with new teammates, as opposed to a Claxton, a Durant, and Irving, guys that have been around and go, yeah, we know what we're doing here. Simmons is probably thinking, I could use the extra reps to make sure that I'm on point.
Yeah, I just think they like Vaughn better than Nash. I think that they like. I just think it's pretty. I think it's pretty simple. I think this is a very clear example. If we can just trust the quotes, and sometimes you just have to trust the quotes, and that's just what they are, right? Like if you trust the quotes, then all you can really think about is that I like this person better than this person, and I respect this person's like sort of just coaching dynamic better than the others. And so two people that can do maybe they do the exact same scheduling thing, but you're just going to like it coming from the person you like, and you're not going to like it as much coming from the person you don't like. And it's more about the person than it is about the actual philosophy or the actual schedule or the practices and stuff. And I think that's really true to most life relationships just in general, is that like, if two people say the same exact thing and you like one of them and you dislike the other, it's going to sound and hear
right.
very differently from the one you like to the one you don't. And not to say anyone disliked Nash, but I think at this point we have enough of a example or enough of enough of a sample size to probably know that even if they liked him as a person, there was no one praising the Steve Nash coaching job, right? Like, we've never heard any of that. We never heard it during the time. We never heard it after. I'd be shocked if he got another job at this point. Like, I just think maybe that was part of it. And maybe sometimes these players, a guy like Durant, maybe they can just see it, right? Like they can just see it's like, hey, this isn't happening, right? Like this, whatever it is.
Maybe they're actually more of a fan of Steve Nash, the person, than of the coach, which is why you hear, hey, we're complimenting as a person, as a, guy that I used to see play, as a guy around the organization. Like, nothing wrong with Steve Nash, the person. The problem is,
I meant like as the coach. I meant the person as the coach. Because like if you go back through KD's kind of tenure, he played for Steve Kerr, like just universally considered to be one of the best coaches. He played for Billy Donovan, like also like one of the best coaches. And so he just has
Popovich for Team USA.
Right, exactly. So he's just seen how these other guys operate, and maybe he just is like, Nash isn't that. And so and maybe at some point you come up with the different reasons why you don't like it. Oh, we don't practice enough. We're not working on this stuff. But it really probably comes down to this preternatural sense you might have. That's just like, I've seen good coaches in action, and this maybe just isn't it. Right. And like this, and when it comes to in-game stuff, when it comes to planning, when it comes to strategy, when it comes to just going about coaching business, whatever it is, I do think probably that has got to be part of it, because, and I think, and look, you can even see the differences. It's so clear what the differences are with Vaughn to Nash, just one-to-one, how those press conferences go, how he speaks about the team, how he speaks about strategy, what we see him doing in game with confidence with these players, right? Even how he gives the in-game he gives about as detailed and locked in answers to just those throwaway TNT sideline things in between the quarters that most guys just want to walk away from. He's just dead on with whoever's asking the questions, doesn't even blink. And so it's just a totally different dynamic. And there's a good sense here that the players just like that more.
Very different. There's the very rare occasion when the sideline reporter is saying, "Okay, thanks so much, Jacque. We got to go." No, we got to go, Jacque. Got to let the mic go.
He doesn't even blink. He doesn't even blink. He just stares at them. He stares at them because he's like so intent. I'm making fun of him. Just like seriously, he's just trying to give such an intense answer. And It's just a totally, totally different vibe. So when you bring that vibe to the team, again, you might have all the same sort of schedule practice stuff, but the vibe is different. And I think we all just understand how that kind of works just in life.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a really good comparison of when you feel like you trust someone, when you know someone, you're just inclined to put more stock in what their opinion, their perspective might be relative to a stranger. Could be a genius, but I don't know him, and it doesn't feel like I can fully invest my trust in him, let alone what happened over the last couple of years for Brooklyn. And on that note, because I do want to get to this upcoming schedule here, as we highlighted a couple episodes ago, how critical certain games are going to be. And in spite of winning 10 out of their last 11, there's still this test kind of looming for the Brooklyn Nets the last couple of years. And putting that into context, it is funny. I mentioned James Harden, and there was a full-length article that did. I want to make sure I get it right, with Weissman for Fox Sports. He was asked to describe his time in Brooklyn, and he said he wasn't able to get healthy because he was dealing with the hamstring injury. But Harden then went on to express his feelings about the Nets and a need for structure. Quote, I don't mean to just talk down on anybody or whatever. It was just there was no structure, and even superstars, they need structure. That's what allows us to be the best players and leaders for our respective organizations, he said. And he went on to say, internally, things were not what I expected when I was trying to get traded there. I think everybody knows that, and I know people were going to talk and say, you quit and all that stuff. But then the following summer, the other superstar there, Kevin Durant, wanted to leave. So it's like, am I still the quitter? Now, that's a little bit of him not wanting to be labeled a certain way. And also, I think this speaks to the contrast between Jacque Vaughn and Steve Nash and what was going on. Because remember, once upon a time, we didn't even bat an eye at the idea that Sean Marks is a really good GM that is pushing all the right buttons and building this team to the point where they can attract Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving to want to come there, where they'll go and execute a trade for James Harden. But Steve Nash ends up kind of being the common denominator that maybe started to fracture this thing, where as you bring in different players and different personalities, a key role he was supposed to play was now starting to have its own issues, let alone the on-court stuff. I do think it's interesting. We never really bashed James Harden in the moment too heavily, outside of maybe letting his body go a little to facilitate that move. And yet it does line up pretty strongly with Kevin Durant's sentiments, it seems, in terms of what his frustrations were this past summer.
Yeah, and I think that probably for Harden was low-hanging fruit after all the other stuff has come out, because now the guy's gone, and this is, you can do your own little sort of hit piece. I think it's really tough to defend Harden, even if Harden disagree. It'd be hilarious. It is hilarious to hear Harden say that, the structure wasn't there and certain things weren't in place, because go back and watch the Sacramento game from last year and see if that's a guy who seems super dialed in on all the specifics about what's happening
on anything,
right? So
at all.
It was one of the worst things you've ever seen. It was one of the most embarrassing NBA performances you'll ever see from a guy who had just so clearly quit. So yeah, I can understand why Harden would say that, because one, it's easy to say. Two, it might be true. I mean, there's increasing evidence that this might have been the case, that the team just maybe was, floundering a little bit with where the coaching was, or maybe a lot of it with where the coaching was. And it's I kind of can hear it from just about everyone else, not necessarily the guy who, yeah, look, he was hurt and he came in. I don't know if he was out of shape because he was hurt or whatever, right? So I'm not sure where that was. All I know is that guy 100% quit on the team in his second team in 2 years, that he just straight up quit on the court. And so I don't know if I can hear that he was disappointed with the attention to detail after watching that performance, but I get probably what he's saying in the macro.
And oh, by the way, he can lump himself in with Kevin Durant and say, look what Kevin Durant then did in the offseason. But guess where that was? The offseason. And guess what Kevin Durant never did? Quit on the court, right? So you can have the same opinion about something and also go about voicing that in two very different ways, right? So there is the process where you say, yeah, I don't love what I'm seeing here, and I'm now going to force my way out, versus I may be saying there's an ultimatum on the table, but it's ultimately going to be done after the season, because there's still something to play for last year if you could get healthy in James Harden and if you can be on the court with this team. So that's certainly a big part of it. And I know coming up in a second here, we'll get your feedback on that, as well as look at these key games that the Nets have coming up here to maybe cement what we think are all the positive vibes and smart alterations that this staff has made.
All right, first, we're going to talk to you about our friends over at betonline.net. Betonline.net has got you covered for all of your betting action that you can ever really dream about these days. BetOnline's got you covered over there. If you go to BetOnline right now, you're going to see Brooklyn Nets. They climbed up to, about in the same place, 7th place overall in those championship odds at plus 1,400. Celtics, Bucks, Clippers, Warriors, even without Steph. Come on, folks. With Suns, Grizzlies, and then the Nets. That's the order over at betonline.net. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. They got the pro football, obviously basketball, college bowl season here. The World Cup finished, but they were covering it hot and heavy over there at BetOnline. If you like sports podcasts, you can find those as well. It's the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head on over to the website today. Use that mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts.
All right. So before we turn our attention to these key games coming up, which, by the way, involves the Steph Curry-less Golden State Warriors on Wednesday night, closing thoughts around the James Harden and just Kevin Durant contrast there?
Yeah, it was mostly just that. I think we probably put a bow on it, but it was just that with Harden, with Durant, it was, you're right that it came about in the offseason. And even during the season, once he decided to come back and play for the Nets this season, right? And remember, it's like easy to forget now, like Nash was the coach here at the beginning of the season, right? And we never heard word one about it, even when they started off really, really poorly. Like the effort from Durant and company, or Durant specifically, was still very high, and there didn't seem to be, there was clearly problems, but it never reopened the can of worms about the trade and all this other stuff. Like, it was kind of radio silence, and then he got fired, right? So that could have gone a different way, right? You came out of a summer where you had requested a trade. You had, sat around, done kumbaya, and figured out a way to all come back together. And it's the beginning of the season started off horribly, and you didn't hear anything about it. Like, that could have played out much differently. Because again, we saw it play out differently with Harden. We had this exact scenario. It kind of went off the rails. No Kyrie last year and all this stuff. Didn't like the situation. And he was like, peace. Right. And he just basically, and he's totally sat it out. So I just wanted to highlight the difference between these two guys, because while they both might have said the same things, they went about the business in completely polar opposite kind of ways.
That being the case, we all agree Jacque Vaughn, Coach of the Year. That's good to know. We'll wait for that award to be.
He's in the conversation. I'll put it. You kind of joked about it.
No. I said it jokingly, but I do believe he's going to have to get talked about in that way if this keeps trending in this direction, right?
Yeah, totally. Like, we've seen. Like, I think that it's not going to be there now. Some of these other teams are probably just going to be a little bit better, and the stories around them are probably just going to be just that much better, right? Like, I think in the end, sometimes, especially with the coaching stuff, the narrative wins out. The Vaughn narrative is good, but probably not good enough. If you look at some other, let me just look real quick. Yeah. So right now he's plus 1,200. He's actually 10th overall in Coach of the Year standings. You just have some of these other. See, the problem with this year with Coach of the Year is that you have some really good teams. Like, you have Joe Mazzulla and in Boston, right? You have Willie Green. The Pelicans are playing really, really well. But then you actually have some of these other teams who are exceeding expectations also, like Mike Brown and the Kings, right? Like, there's actually so many teams that are either playing really well or teams that people thought were going to be bad and are playing well, that I think it's actually a much more, at least right now, crowded. It's just more crowded than it usually is, because you just have like Will Hardy, right? Like, no one thought that team was going to be good, and now they're great. They thought they were going to be fully in the tank, and they're actually winning. So, like, there's just more names than would usually be there. So where he sits at right now is 10th overall, tied. Well, I take that back. He's tied for 8th.
But he'll have to. But Jacque Vaughn will have to turn around, and just to your point, because it's a regular season award, the Nets will have to be the number 1 seed. Maybe the 2 seed is enough. Like, the bar for accomplishment gets set a lot higher because you have the Kevin Durants, you have the Kyrie Irvings of the world on your roster. But it's still just good to make that note about him. Now, the other thing here that I do think is interesting, just in terms of where the Nets are, and obviously the next 3 games they have are going to be Golden State, no Steph Curry, get pretty lucky there. Some chance they even miss them next month when they come back around on Golden State, and then also Boston and Cleveland. And it's funny, we had talked about early on in the season, I remember saying when you looked in the standings, it was all this jarbled mess, and you're looking at point differentials, and you're trying to figure out where this is actually going to start to shake out. the top 6 seeds right now in the Eastern Conference, only one team over the last 10 games has less than 7 wins. And it's the Boston Celtics, who are going through a bit of their lull. But the Milwaukee has 7 wins. Brooklyn has the best at 9, 7-3 for Cleveland, 8-2 for the New York Knicks, by the way. And of course, the 76ers are 7-3 as well. And every single one of those teams is plus in the point differential. There's only one other team narrowly 0.1 above there. The Toronto Raptors way down in 10th. Point being, like, the Eastern Conference is starting to get itself in order in terms of who are the teams that are playing better basketball right now. And the Brooklyn Nets are a game back from Cleveland and then 3 games back from Boston and Milwaukee effectively on their records. These next 3 games, like, I feel like nail on the head for you and me about, no Curry. That changes certainly the Golden State Warriors game. But 3 games from now, you're probably going to know, are we moving up in the standings? We could be tying or getting past Cleveland, or maybe we go 1-2 and it's a little bit of a stumble and you reset that timeline for the next big game here. For all the winning that they've done over the last 11 games, 10 of the last 11, I'm still now just circling specifically really the Milwaukee and maybe the Cleveland game more importantly over the holiday. But these 3 games, like, this is the test. And by the way, a Steve Kerr coach team, even without Steph Curry, is not going to be a pushover. You're not going to treat them like you do the Detroits of the world just because they are missing their critical best player on that team.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they just beat the Warriors without Curry, just beat the Raptors by 16 the other night with Jordan Poole dropped 43 on Toronto. So, I mean, Toronto's doing their own bit of stumbling here. But yes, like, this is still a team that is live to play. Are you going to get the championship sort of style look that we thought we might be looking at if we're thinking about the Nets as a contender? No, clearly not. Like, they're not a contender without Steph. But these are still not pushover games. And we've seen from the Nets too, like, no game's a pushover game for the Nets. They play all these games close. On the season, this team's point, we're going to say this over and over again, the Nets point differential is 1.7. The Knicks have a better point differential than the Nets this season, right? So, and that's even with the Nets having probably what you would consider to be some luck around at least some of the teams that they've played over the last couple months in terms of superstars being out. And look, and it's the NBA too. Like, all these teams are going to come hard. We'd said this multiple times, and maybe I was a little, rough on the Pistons last night because you look across and you see Jaden Ivey and you see Killian Hayes and you're like, hey, let's just win this by 20 and go home. But it is still the NBA, and these guys are all NBA players, and they're going to see the Nets, and they're going to want to get up for these games. So it's always going to be tough. But yeah, in terms of evaluating on a championship timeline, I still think that's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough, and I still think that the team is going through. I still think the Nets are, like I said on yesterday's podcast, I think they're still going through a transitional phase of their own here. I think they're still trying to figure this out. Like, they have lots of guys that are either not fully up to speed, that are still working their way back. They have a lot of guys who deserve playing time and are going to have to kind of play so you see what you have. And I think that's still going to be interesting / maybe a little muddled over these next couple of weeks. And I think the schedule affords them the ability to kind of figure it out on the fly. But I still think these next couple of months and really just weeks will still be like trying to figure out these rotations. They ran completely different rotations yesterday, right? And I think we're going to still see that.
And that's some of the fun and some of the ease of having this schedule, where I looked it up just the other day. The Nets have had the 7th easiest opponent record in terms of who they've played to start the season. That includes some big matchups with Boston, etc. But for the most part, they've had some, quote, easy matchups or easier ones where, by the way, last 2 games, you were afforded to be down by double digits and still get yourself back into form and allow being the more talented team to be the reason why you end up winning those games. And I even just had up too the relative the RPI index for this season. The Brooklyn Nets, that percentage puts them at 22nd in terms of the overall schedule they've played, etc. Like, so it's to your point. I think I want one of these games. I want to put it that way. And Golden State can be the first one on Wednesday night. They're going to be a well-coached team. They have depth. They have talent. This is a good test to say, can you make when the in-game adjustments are needed in a way that is different when you're playing Golden State than playing the Raptors or playing the Pistons, and a diminished Raptors team at that point too. When you're playing those teams, sometimes the in-game strategy is just to get the ball into Durant's hands a little more. A game like against Golden State, it requires you to maybe say, where are those marginal moves we make around a Seth Curry, a TJ Warren, a Joe Harris, an Edmund Sumner? Where's the usage? How do you create the matchups inside of the rotations? Like, this will drill down a little bit more on what Jacque Vaughn has been doing well, and if he can continue that trend, and if this team is really meeting some of those challenges. So I'm excited for it. I think this is a really good thing, by the way, for the Brooklyn Nets to like go on this type of run, right your ship in a really big way, and now get a test. Like, it's okay to kind of get a test, and maybe it's a gut punch, and I won't hate it if it ends up being, oh, we still have to tweak some things. That's okay. It's good to learn a lesson 30 games into the year, 35 games into the year, and not be figuring it out in game 79 and 80 when it really doesn't matter anymore.
Totally. And I think that, like we said at the beginning, it does seem like Vaughn at least is like the guy now to kind of steer. Excuse me.
He always gets choked up around coaches. He does.
Getting choked up how good Jacque Vaughn is. I might need to have you carry me out here. I got something stuck in my throat. About that Vaughn is the actual guy to steer the ship. All right, I'm going to have you get out of here because I'm going to start losing my mind with a coughing fit here.
You better believe it, friends. Of course, as you know, they will play on Wednesday against the Golden State Warriors. In the meantime, we'll be back again talking more things Brooklyn Nets basketball ahead of that game. The easier thing you help us with. Doug said by the new year, I say by Christmas, friends. You get over to YouTube. We're pushing for 4,000, and oh my goodness, can we taste it? You can leave a little virtual gift underneath our tree by helping us get over that hump. You subscribe, you share it, you get over that podcast feed, wherever you get those needs fulfilled as well. And as certainly Norman Dale would want us to know, if you put in effort and concentration into playing to your potential to be the best that you can be, I don't care what the scoreboard says at the end of the game. In my book, we're going to be winners.
I love it. One of my all-time, the all-time great poet. We with Norman Dale. My goodness, going to go watch that tonight. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.